Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to this new live stream where this time we're going to focus on debugging techniques and more specifically a debugging approach that will allow us to debug our network code without making a single change to our code base. But before we start, oh, I was about to check on my phone if I'm live, but I can see the counter view updated on my software, so I'm live, there is no problem like last time. All right, so welcome everyone. Where was I? Yes, we're going to talk about debugging network code, and for this, we're going to use a tool that's called Proxyman. So first, full disclosure, this live stream is sponsored by Proxyman. You can see the little commercial collaboration written on the top right of the picture. And the reason why I chose to do this live stream, even though usually I don't do live stream about specific tools, is that first, it's a great tool that I've used myself on my own before they ever asked me to do something sponsored with them. The tool has many free features that you can use without needing to buy a license. And finally, this approach of doing of debugging network code by doing proxying is super interesting. And even if you were to not use this tool, I still believe that learning about this approach has a really good value as a software engineer. So before we get started, what do I still have to say? Of course, so a big thank you to Proxyman for sponsoring this live stream. In the description, you have a link to learn more about Proxyman and to download it if you want to try it. And also, if you are watching live, you have a code to get 50% off a paid license, but this code will only be available during the live stream and the days that come after it. So if you're watching the replay, there is a good chance that the code isn't there anymore. But don't worry, as I was saying just before, the tool has many free features, so if you want to try it, you can still try it and it will still be super useful. So how does this software work? Let's have a look. So I've launched Proxyman. You can see it's just behind me. It's this window behind me. So I've already launched it. So if you launch it for the first time, it will ask you to install a tool that will help it monitor network traffic with better performances. On my end, I've already done it, but you will need to do it when you try it. And the way that Proxyman works, basically everything is in the name. It uses proxying. So proxying, the idea is that it's going to intercept outgoing network requests and also intercept the response, and by putting itself in the middle, so between the sender and the receiver, so acting as a proxy, is going to give us the opportunity to first observe the content of the network traffic, but also interact with it. We're going to see that we'll be able to trigger alerts when certain requests are being made, that will also be able to change on the fly what request return. We'll even be able to map a network request to a local file on disk. So this way we can implement some kind of mock. And what's great is that all of these operations will be able to do them without changing anything in our code base. So this approach will work without needing to rebuild your project, but it can also work if, for instance, you are running a binary that you cannot change because you are a tester, you are a product manager, you don't have access to Xcode and the source code. So that's how proxying works. So I have not started monitoring the network traffic. You can see that it was paused. So I'm going to click on start recording and we're going to see things start to happen. So you can see, for instance, that because I have software from the Adobe Suite installed on my Mac, there is some network traffic going to Adobe. I have also a bit from Safari because I have LinkedIn, I guess, in some of my pinned tabs on Safari. You can see the software I'm using right now to do live streaming, and it's querying youtube.googleapis.com. So this is more than likely the request that is used to update the little counter that tells me how many people are watching. So what's interesting is that you can see that we cannot see a lot of things for now. We can only see the domain that's being queried. And there is one reason for it. It's because the traffic is using HTTPS. So when you're doing HTTPS, your traffic is encrypted. So if someone tries to monitor it on the network, they won't be able to see what's inside your request and inside the response you get. Of course, there is a way to circumvent it in Proxyman. I'm not going to enable it for the streaming software because I don't want to take the risk of crashing my stream, but with the code we'll write in Xcode, we'll be able to monitor and inspect HTTPS traffic. I see a few messages in the chat, which reminds me that I forgot to say, but of course, since we are live, if at any point you have any question, remark, or anything, please use the chat. It's meant for this. So I see a message that is about covering more advanced topics. So yeah, I'm taking note. Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, so let's try and get started with an actual Xcode project. So I actually created an Xcode project just before so that we can gain a bit of time. So you can see that I've touched the window in Xcode on my other screen and we can see network traffic happening because Xcode is making some network requests. So let me show you on screen the project we're going to use for now. So it's an extremely simple project. It's a command line tool that runs on macOS. And what it's doing is simply making a single network call to an API. So I'm querying the moviedb.org, which is an API where you can get data about movies and TV shows. It's a basic example, but it's going to be super useful because we're going to be able to try and monitor the content of the request and the response that we get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code, so this command line tool. So you can see the name is called Proxyman test. That's the name of the executable. It's going to be important for when we try to find the request inside Proxyman. So you can see the code run successfully. The network call returned. I printed the response. So you can see we get a JSON with some data about movies. So I asked for currently popular movies. And for instance, can we see a title? Leo, for instance. So it's a popular movie, apparently. Of course, when you don't have the UI, it's hard to know which movie it is. Here we have Oppenheimer, which I guess is more familiar to us than the other movie. So that's great. Now let's try and go back to Proxyman to see what happened. So I'm going to unfold here the apps folder and I'm going to focus only on the executable I want to monitor because otherwise I have a ton of traffic. I have traffic from Xcode. I have traffic from these processes that we can guess have been spawned by Xcode. I have traffic from software installed on my Mac, even from my my live broadcasting software. So I'm going to select Proxyman. This way, I only get the traffic from Proxyman, and you can see there is only one request, and that makes sense because I have run executed only one request with this executable. It's this call right here, which queries this URL right here. So let me go back to Proxyman, and you can see that I make a call to api.themoviedb.org. So that makes sense. That's what I had in my code. And as I said, you can see that I cannot see anything inside the response because the response has been encrypted. And I cannot see anything in the body also, but it makes sense because there is no body. But even if there were a body, I couldn't see it because it would be encrypted. So there is a way around it. It's that we can install a certificate on our Mac. So I've already installed it in my case. And this certificate, we can then enable it either only for this domain or only for this executable. And this way, Proxyman will be able to re-encode. Basically, Proxyman will get the original request and it's going to be able to re-encode it with its own cryptographic certificate and key. And this way, it will be able to see the answer. Of course, that's something that you want to do with caution. That's why it's not enabled by default, because when you do it, it kind of opens up the way for people monitoring your traffic. So you only want to do it when you are debugging. That's why it's not enabled by default, as I was saying. But I'm going to enable it on all the requests of the executable Proxyman tests. So it's enabled. Now I'm going to relaunch my executable. So you can see it executed again. You can see it's still working as expected because the content of the response is still being printed to the console. And you can see that this time we have way more data, and namely we can see the content of the answer. So we can see the header of the answer, which is useful, but most of the time it's not what we actually want. What we want is the body. Interestingly, we can see that there is nothing in the body. It says empty body. I'm going to move the window a bit so that I'm sure I don't cover it. So why does it say empty body in that case? It's not a bug or a mistake on my end. It's actually a normal behavior, but one that can be a bit confusing because you're very likely to have it when you try Proxyman the first time. And even myself, the first time I was a bit confused. But if you pay close attention to the UI, you can see one hint, you can even see two hints of why we have this behavior. Because if you look at the response code, the HTTP response code of the second request, you can see it's 304, which is different from 200 in the first one. And you can see the status also says not modified. So not modified is what this code means. And the reason we get this, it's because this API call is being cached. And so since we are making the same call just a minute after, the server is telling us the data is still the same. I'm not going to send you the data again. So if you're working with APIs or backends that have enabled caching, you are more than likely to see the same behavior when you work with Proxyman. So that's why I wanted to point it out. So there are two ways that we can fix it. The first one would be to alter the request inside our code. It's not the best approach, but I still want to show it because it will show you that indeed is behaving as I was saying. So this time I'm going to request the upcoming movies. So it's an other endpoint. So let me make the call. And I hope I spelled upcoming correctly. Perfect. I did get an answer, a different answer than before. And this time you can see we get a 200. And this time we have data in the body. And so in the body, we can see we have the JSON that we can just scroll its content. We could also copy it, paste it into Sublime Text if we wanted to have a look at it with the full features of a text editor. But this trick I did of changing the API endpoint, I told you it's not the best because, well, first, here there was another endpoint that was convenient, but my code is doing something different. So it's not something that you can apply most of the time. As it turns out, there is a feature for this in Proxyman, because if I rerun this request, you will see that we get the same behavior than before, so not modified. But inside the menu, so if you go in the menu, and I'm realizing that you don't see the menu, so let me just move my window a bit so that you can see the menu. Perfect. So there is a feature to disable caching. Of course, I don't remember where it is. Okay, it's here. So no caching. So I've enabled it. You can see here on the bottom right, no caching. And normally, if I rerun the request once more, you can see that this time caching has been disabled. So how has caching been disabled? Basically, Proxyman is both removing from the header of the request the header that let the server know when the previous answer was received, and it's also injecting some additional headers to say that it wants to opt out of caching. This way, there is a very high chance that the backend will indeed disable its caching. I just want to see if I can show you that the header is not here anymore. Um, I think it's this header right here. Yes. I'm not 100% sure because I am not my knowledge of HTTP is not as good as it is with iOS, but I think it's this header. So if non-match, that gives the backend the data about when the last call was made. And as you can see, as soon as I enabled no caching, this header was removed from the request. So I'm 90% sure that this is the header that Proxyman removed. And you can also see that it added the header cache control, no cache, which wasn't there before. I see a very interesting question from Brandon, which I will answer just after, because I think I still wanted to. No, I think actually I covered what I wanted to say with the no caching. So actually, I will answer your question. So Brandon, you're saying, does Proxyman require setting up a proxy in iOS, macOS, like Charles Proxy does? So in Proxyman, what you need to do, and we'll see just after, is that indeed if you want to debug the traffic, the HTTPS traffic from an iOS simulator or an iOS device, you need to do an action that you can do through Proxyman. It's just the click of a button, but you still need to do an action. The reason is that what we've done with this command line tool is basically a man-in-the-middle attack. We are the attacker, so we are attacking ourselves, so it's not a problem because we are not a harmful attacker, but it's still a man-in-the-middle attack. And so a command line tool in macOS is not going to prevent it, but in iOS, and I guess maybe also in a macOS app, you have something called ATS for App Transport Security, which is going to detect that there is a man-in-the-middle attack, and you will see when we use the simulator just after that the network request will not give a result as soon as we start monitoring it with Proxyman, and we will need to install a specific certificate on the simulator or on the iOS device in order to be able to see the content of the network. So you have to do it, and I would say that probably all proxying tools will need to do it because it's a consequence of the security policy that iOS has by default. But thank you for the question because it's a very good question. And I see another question, which is, what is the benefit for caching then? So the benefit for caching, there are two benefits, we could say. The first one is for the backend, because maybe that fetching the data is costly for the backend, and if the backend knows that the data hasn't changed, then it can avoid generating the answer again. So it's an economy of resource for the backend, and it's also an economy of resource in terms of data transferred because you are not sending large JSON. And even though JSON is not that big, if you do it a lot, it adds up, and it can still at the end be a non-negligible amount of data that you've transferred. Especially if your user is on a plan that is not a data plan that is not unlimited. That's why many APIs and backends will have this caching approach to conserve resources both on the backend and also on the front end, because you want to limit the network traffic. But of course, caching is one of the things that are hard in computer science. People tend to say that there are three things difficult in computer science. It's printers, dates, and caching. Because when you do caching, then you need to deal with disabling a cache. So that's why, as a developer, caching can be a pain. But still, on a system at scale, usually caching does have its benefits. Especially if you are the CTO of the backend that is footing the bill for the AWS or the Google Cloud bill. When you enable caching, I guess in many instances you can reduce that bill, and so the less money you spend, the more money you keep. So that's why caching is an interesting strategy. And I would expect many of the big APIs that you're going to use, I would expect them to have caching if it makes sense. Of course, there might be some places where caching doesn't make sense. For instance, I don't know, a real-time API about the stock market, maybe doesn't make sense. Or also, if some query is going to return random data, it doesn't make sense. Actually, I just want to say the technical term, even though it's a bit off topic, but the word you probably want to look is called idempotence. And so in HTTP, a good practice is that a GET request should be idempotent. And idempotent, it means that it's a word that comes from math, but it means that if you make the same GET request several times in a row and nothing else has changed on the backend, then the result of the request should always be the same. Like if you ask the list of most recent movies and no one has added a new movie, then you should always get the same result. And so the requests that are very interesting to cache are idempotent requests because idempotency is a property that naturally leads to caching. So that was a bit off topic from how to use Proxyman, but it's still an interesting topic network-wise. So thank you for this question, because I wouldn't have talked that much about caching if you hadn't asked it. So what do I have next? Yes, I wanted to show you also something, is that if you look at the JSON in Proxyman, you can see that it looks pretty nice. We have syntax coloring, we have indentation, and by comparison, it's much better than what we get when we print it into the console in iOS. So that's also one of the reasons why a tool like Proxyman can be interesting, even in cases where you can change the code to just print to the console. It's because printing to the console is very like one-dimensional. You have raw text, you don't have any formatting. I would rather have this as something to work with than what there is in the console. What then did I want to show you? Oh, yes. Something that is also very useful if you're working in a team and you need to create maybe a bug issue for one of your backend colleagues. It's that if you right click on a network request in Proxyman, you can see that you can do this thing, copy C URL. And this is very useful. So I'm going to copy it. I will paste it in Xcode just because I need a place where I can paste text. And you can see that it's pasting the command you need to run inside command line tool. So actually, it doesn't look that great in Xcode. So I'm just going to open Sublime Text. So I'm doing it on my second screen. Sorry for the delay. All right. So I have Sublime Text. Normally you can see it. I pasted the code. And so you can see this is the code you want to run inside the terminal if you want to run the same request than the one that was triggered from the code we ran into Xcode. This is extremely useful when you're working with a backend team, because let's say that you don't get the result that you expect inside your iOS app. You're going to let your backend team know, and maybe you will give them in the issue you will open the URL that you've called. But the URL isn't the entire network call. The entire network call also contains the headers, maybe the body. And if you only give the URL to your backend colleagues, they won't have all the data to reproduce the exact same network call than the one that your app triggered. And we saw that it's important because we saw that by changing the headers, we can disable caching, for instance. So this ability to export a request as CURL, as you can see here, is very useful, because now if this API call for some reason is causing an issue or is not behaving as I want, I can open an issue either with my backend team or with like the provider of this API, and I can just give them this, and it gives them the ability to replay the request exactly as I've made it. You can see even in the user agent, we can see here that there is the name of the executable. There is the fact it's run by CF Network, by Darwin, so it's the libraries used by macOS. So it will be the exact same call that the macOS command line app I made has run. And this way, the backend team will be able to reproduce it exactly. And that's a very, very useful feature. I've had like situations in the past when working with big teams, where you only pass the URL and they tell you, yeah, it's not enough, or maybe when you just make the call with the URL, it behaves in a way, but when you add some header that you are not aware of, it doesn't behave the same way. So that's a feature if you are working in a team that is extremely useful. I see a question in the chat. What's your API for the movie DB? The API key. So you can get your API key on their website. You can search for themoviedb.org and then go to their API and get your API key. It's you can get one for free. You don't have to pay to get one. I see Candy, you're saying, I think I had that problem with a news API, but the full response would only show when I VPN. So yeah, it's sometimes you can get unexpected things in networking, and it's possible that. So if you're talking about the caching issue, maybe when you use a VPN, like you have different maybe like IP addresses, and so your backend is doing something in answer to that. But networking can lead to unexpected things. And I see also that this CURL can be very useful for automated testing. That's true, because so it's more for testing the API than the app itself, but that's a way for your backend team to write end-to-end tests that call the API in the exact same way than the actual client app would do it. So let me close this window and let me go back to Proxyman, because there is another thing we can do that I wanted to show you, is that we can save the logs of, I think it's here. Yes, so you can export the request in several ways. You can even publish it to a gist on GitHub, but I wanted to show you export as Proxyman log. So I'm just going to put it in my downloads folder. So I'm going to show it to you. So it's this file right here. And when you open it, you can see it reopens it in Proxyman. So this can be useful if, once again, you're working in a team and your teammate also has Proxyman. This way, you can export a request and they can see it in Proxyman exactly like you've seen it. So this can also be useful, and it's one of the features that I wanted to highlight. So let me remove it just so that I don't get confused and I only focus on the actual app that I'm debugging, which is this one. I think that's all I wanted to show you for a command line tool. Now we will move on to the second part, where we will use Proxyman with an actual iOS app. So let me switch this Xcode for another. So we are once again in Xcode. I'm trying to put the window so that you see everything. Okay, and I'm just going to move it because I can hide the menu for now. I don't need it. Okay, so we are in Xcode, and I reused a project that I had built in one of my previous live stream. So it's this live stream, the one that focused on live iOS. So it's called, the repo on GitHub is called Live iOS App Architecture. It was the live stream architecture of an iOS app. What are the best practices? I reused it because it's a simple iOS app with navigation between two screens, and it has basically everything you need in order to show a real-world example. So why build something new when you can reuse something that you already know works? So if you want to get the code, you can get the repo. So on GitHub, it's available publicly, and you will want to get the branch after, where there is the code with the good architecture. So I'm going to run the app a first time to show you how it works. So I'm not running Proxyman for now. I'm just making the simulator a little bit bigger. Okay. So you can see the app queries the exact same API than the one I've showed you before. So the MovieDB API. So you can see it's getting upcoming movies. So you can see some names that you might be familiar with. For instance, the new Hunger Games movie or the movie on Napoleon. Just need to click OK on that. And if I tap on a movie, it leads me to a detail screen where I have the picture of the movie, the overview, and then the credits. So the actors with the character they play. So we can see here Joaquin Phoenix is playing Napoleon. That's how the app works. Now let's see how we can monitor it using Proxyman. And I'm going to do it step by step because you will see that we're going to run into the issues that I mentioned just before. So first, I'm going back into Proxyman, and this time I want to take a look at this app called App Architecture. So just to show you, it's the name of the executable right here in Xcode. So it's the name of the app. You can see it's running in the simulator. You can see the icon of the simulator. You can see the calls being made. So the calls to the moviedb.org. Here, the call to image.tmdb.org because the images are stored on a different domain. But just like for the command line tool, because the traffic is HTTPS, we cannot see the content until we enable SSL proxying. So I'm going to enable it for all domains of this app. So it's enabled. And now I'm going to relaunch the app. So let's see what's going to happen. You can see the app is broken. No movies are appearing in the list. And we can see we have a lot of warnings or errors in the console. So let's take a look at what's happening in the console. You can see ATS failed system trust. That might remind you of what I was saying just before. So system trust evaluation failed, and do we get a human readable message here? So an SSL error has occurred and the secure connection to the server cannot be made. Would you like to connect to the server anyway? So this is, is the kind of message you get in Safari telling you like you're about to connect into an unsafe website, or this website might be under attack. Are you sure you want to proceed? So by default, this is disabled in iOS, and the reason is that Proxyman is trying to do this SSL proxying, but iOS is detecting it as an attack, as a potential attack, and so iOS is cutting it so that the app doesn't display wrong data and doesn't send data to a malicious attacker, which is a good thing. Because imagine, for instance, if it were your banking app and iOS wouldn't cut this potential attack, it could enable a malicious person to either intercept some of your data, like your banking credentials, for instance, or also to send you some bad data, because we're going to see that we can really manipulate the traffic. So for instance, someone could make you believe you're making a transfer to someone when you're actually making it to someone else. So that's a very good thing that iOS is stopping this traffic, but here we want to bypass it, or rather we want to make it so that iOS still considers the connection secure, and the way to do it is to install a certificate on the simulator. So let me open not the simulator but Proxyman, and I need to show you again the menu bar so that you can see what I'm doing. And so we'll see. Can I remember where I need to click? It's certificate. Install certificate on iOS. So I've already installed the certificate on the Mac before, and I don't think I would have been able to enable SSL proxying if I hadn't done it. But this time I need to also do it on the iOS device. So here it's either on physical devices or simulator. In my case, it's gonna be a simulator. And so you can see I have installed the certificate on the Mac. Now I need to also install and trust it on the simulator. You can see that Proxyman is finding one booted simulator, so it's the one I've started from Xcode. So I'm going to install and trust. So it's installed, and finally I need to reboot the simulator. So the simulator is rebooting, and now if I launch the app again, I'm going to do it from Xcode. This way we have the logs in the console. Normally, if everything is working, perfect, it's working again. So you can see that the traffic is working correctly because the response is being received and parsed by the app. And if I go into Proxyman, you can see that I can monitor the traffic. So that's the little thing you need to add the little operation you need to run in order to be able to monitor traffic when your code is running inside iOS, both for the simulator and also for an actual device. I won't show you for a device because I feel that trying to do things with the device during a live stream is basically guaranteed to either fail or crash at some point. So I won't attempt to do that, but it's the same procedure if you want to do it. You will maybe need to input your code on your device in order to install the certificate. That's the only difference. So let me see my script to make sure I'm not forgetting to tell you anything. I think I've showed you, I just wanted to show you one more thing before I get to the next part, which is that we can pin an app. So I'm going to do it this way. I can easily find my app when I will, as we can be sure, lose track of it at some point inside the window. Okay, then I want to show you a really interesting feature of Proxyman that's called breakpoints. So I'm sure you are familiar with breakpoints in Xcode, the little thing that you set up like this. So for instance, I can go in my movies view controller, I can set up a breakpoint in the method table view did select row at index path, and then inside my simulator, if I select a movie, the breakpoint is triggered. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. I just wanted to show it because it allows me to give this kind of definition of what a breakpoint is, which is that a breakpoint is a piece of code, we could say, that gets triggered by our code reaching by the execution flow of our program reaching a certain point in the code. But as it turns out, we can also apply this idea of a breakpoint to our networking, and we could say we want to have a breakpoint that triggers when a given request is sent. So it's kind of similar to a symbolic breakpoint in Xcode. I don't know if you've ever used it. If you've never, you will want to because it's very useful. So I'm not sure if you can see it when I click here. So I click on the plus here. Unfortunately, the menu is appearing below the window, so you might not see it. So let me just move the window a bit. So it's this thing here, symbolic breakpoint, and you can attach a breakpoint to a symbol. So for instance, you can create a breakpoint that will trigger when a function is called. So this is extremely useful when you need to debug some like event happening in your code, but you're not sure where the event is happening. And we're going to do the same thing inside Proxyman. So let me put the window at its original size. Let me also get rid of this breakpoint and resume the execution. Okay, so I'm gonna go into Proxyman, and on this request, I'm going to create a breakpoint. So for that, I do a right click, and then once again, can I remember where it is? It's in Tools, Breakpoint. So I'm creating a breakpoint. So let me make the window at a size that you can see. Okay, let me check. Yes, you can see it. So I'm gonna call it movie credits breakpoint. And you can see it's going to be called, for instance, for now, rather, if I make a request that matches this rule. So basically, for now, is the URL equal to this, which is the URL of the current call. For now, I'm just going to use this. So can I remember on which movie I tapped? I have already forgotten. I think it was the Napoleon movie. So I'm going to call it Napoleon movie credits. So for now, I am on purpose making a breakpoint that will only trigger for this exact URL where I have the ID of a specific movie hard-coded. So I want to trigger it when there is a GET request. I'm not using a wildcard for now, but I will be able to use it just after in order to say I want it to trigger for any movie ID. Okay, then you can do things where you include all subpaths of the URL. So I guess it's if you have like additional like trailing slashes with some subpaths to point to like a sub resource. And I want to breakpoint both on the request, so when the request is sent, and also on the response. Done. So I have my breakpoint. I'm going to close the breakpoint window. And now inside my app, so first I'm going to open another movie. I'm opening the Hunger Games. You can see the calls to get both the image and also the credits are being logged inside Proxyman, but no breakpoint triggered. That makes sense because my breakpoint for now it's set to only trigger for this specific URL with the movie ID that starts by 7 and 5. And here you can see it's a different movie ID. But if I go back to my app, so let me get back to the simulator, and I open the Napoleon movie again, this time the breakpoint triggered. So once again, let me resize the window. And you can see here we have the breakpoint triggered and we can inspect the request. So this is the breakpoint triggered on the request. So on the request being made by the iOS app. You can see it's on the request by this little symbol right here with the arrow pointed up, which symbolizes an outward connection. So we can inspect the content of the request. We can even change it a bit maybe, but we will do that just after. I want to do things step after step. You can see we can abort the request. So this way the app will never get the answer if I click on that. We can also continue it. And we have this execute. And to be honest, right now on the spot, I'm not sure what the difference between execute and continue actually. So let's try everything. So first I'm going to click. So I think there might have been a timeout because yes, there has been, you can see timeout because I waited too long. So I wanted to click on abort, but there has been a timeout already. So I'm going to click on abort still, but it won't do anything. I will need to relaunch inside the app. So I'm going to go back to my app. So you can see we don't see the credits because the network call failed for reason of timeout, for reason of me taking too much time to explain. So let's get back to it. I'm clicking on abort. So I've aborted the request being made. You can see that I had to click on abort more than once. That's interesting, and I went a bit too quick on that. So I will redo it. But first, you can see that we still don't have anything because we have aborted every request. I'm also going to clean the console so that we can see the error we get specifically when we abort. So let me get back. Okay. So first time I abort. You can see the request is made again. And then again. And I guess that's a behavior in iOS, in URL session, that by default, it retries the request a few times if it fails for a reason that is not, that seems more like a networking issue rather than the backend encountering an error. So we can see HTTP load failed. The network connection was lost because it wasn't able to establish a connection with the backend. Okay, so you can abort if you want. Most of the time, it's not what you will want to do. You will want to either just monitor or alter the traffic. So let me get back to Proxyman and the simulator. All right. And this time we're going to do continue, for instance. So continue, you can see now we get the response. So the response, we can see in the body, we have some data that we are receiving. So for now, I'm just going to click on continue in order to pass the data to the app before the timeout triggers. So I've tapped on continue. And if I shoot the simulator, you can see that data has indeed appeared. What's going to be interesting is that I'm going to trigger the breakpoint again. I'm going to do continue here. And here on the response, for instance, I'm going to change the name either of the actor or of the role. For instance, I don't know, I'm going to change Napoleon Bonaparte by Oppenheimer, for instance. Then I'm going to do continue. And if I go to my simulator, so interestingly, it's still showing Napoleon Bonaparte. So maybe I didn't want to do continue, maybe I wanted to do execute. Let me try it again. So continue here. And so here, if I change the name, let's see. And I do execute. This time it did it. So maybe if you do a change and you want that change to take effect, you need to click on execute. That might be the difference between continue and execute. Actually, I didn't try to just... oh, wait, I can see that uh, the buttons were outside maybe. Oh, you couldn't see them. So sorry about that. So there were buttons, continue, abort, and execute. And I've realized that I could have just like have my window float over it to see the tooltip. So continue, it says, continue the request with the original data and ignore all the changes made in the breakpoint, and execute is gonna say, execute the breakpoint with the new request response change. So that was exactly what I was saying, and I'm glad I got it right in the end. And I'm just going to re-show it to you because the buttons were hidden. So we have the simulator here. I tap on Napoleon. So request is made. I'm not changing it. I get the response. This time I'm altering the response to say it's not Napoleon Bonaparte, it's Oppenheimer. I click on execute because I want to take this change into account. And you can see that this time the app receives the answer that I have altered. So that's why I was saying that you don't want this to happen in production, because it could allow like anyone to inject bad data that your app would then display. But it's very useful when you are debugging, because it can make it really easy to give some different data to your app just to see that it displays correctly, or to trigger like some scenario that is hard to reproduce with your actual backend data. Like an example that comes to mind is that I've worked a lot in on banking apps, and you have lots of like edge scenarios, like if the user or the person that owns the account is a minor, if the person that owns the account is an American. There are a lot of edge cases, and it can be really hard to have accounts on the backend, on a test backend for each of these scenarios. But if you have just an example of the JSON that you get, you can inject the JSON inside the app through the use of Proxyman, and that can be really, really useful. I see in the chat a question or a remark. So you're saying, so the purpose of this is to check whether the changes in the response are being made. So yes, kind of. So the goal of the breakpoint, oh, I just answered it, but it's a good thing that I give a recap on the breakpoint feature anyway. So the goal of a breakpoint is to be able to be notified when a given request is made, to be able to inspect the content, and potentially to also alter the content. And you will see that we've only touched the tip of the iceberg, because now we can even try to do weirder things. So let's try and get another movie ID, like this one, for instance. So this movie ID here is the one of the new Hunger Games movie. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back to the app, once again tap on Napoleon, but this time in the request that is being sent, I'm changing the ID of the movie. I'm replacing the ID of the movie Napoleon by that of the Hunger Games movie. I'm doing execute, so that what's being sent to the actual backend is the request that I have altered. And you can see I get a new answer that is the right one for the request I've made, which is the cast, the credits of the new Hunger Games movie. And so I'm going to do either continue or execute, because I'm not going to change anything anyway. And you can see that this time the app is displaying the credits of another movie, because through the breakpoint, I have altered the request that was made by the app. So I showed you just before that you can alter the response, but you can just as well alter the request. And once again, it can be very powerful if you want to trigger in your app a different like request than the one your app should make in a normal time, and you want to do it for like testing purposes. Okay, what do I want to show you next? First, I see a remark in the chat. So DA, you're saying, can we install Proxyman on some device so we listen to all traffic for all devices in the same Wi-Fi? Need to debug Android and iOS traffic from one place. So I won't cover, I won't show you the on-device part in this live stream. However, I can tell you that there is an app that you can download on iOS. So let me just phrase it correctly, because there are two things you can do on an iOS device with Proxyman. The first thing is that you can do just what I've done now with the simulator. So you use Proxyman to monitor a specific app that you built from Xcode on a device. Or what you can do is that you can use Proxyman to monitor the traffic that is happening on your iOS device. And for that, you need to download the Proxyman app from the App Store. And it's basically going to behave just the same way than the Proxyman app is behaving on my Mac, because you can see on my Mac it's monitoring all the traffic made by all the apps running on my Mac. One warning though is that probably I haven't tried actually, but you might run into issues with apps that use SSL, because as we've seen, if you try to proxy SSL traffic, it's detected by an attack by iOS by default. And you might also have issues, I think, in almost guaranteed for apps that use a technique called SSL pinning, which is something used, for instance, by banking apps. And it's a technique that gives more security. What you do is that the bundle of the app is going to embed the certificate of the backend. This way, the app can make sure that it's indeed talking to its backend, and it will refuse to talk to any other backends. So for apps that use certificate pinning, you might not be able to monitor the traffic. If it's your own app, you can have an option for your development build to disable it, but can be one of the limitations. And about monitoring all traffic over a Wi-Fi, I'm not sure if you can do it with Proxyman. I know that tools like Wireshark, for instance, do it, at least on Windows. I don't know if Wireshark exists on macOS, actually. I've used it a long time ago and only on Windows. But I'm not sure that you can use Proxyman for this. At least I never tried, so I cannot give you a full answer. That's the best answer I could give you. But thank you for the remark, because it was an interesting one on how to use Proxyman on an actual iOS device. What did I want to show you? Yes, still on breakpoints. So I showed you how to create a breakpoint for request where everything was hard-coded. Now let's try to create a breakpoint that will trigger regardless of the movie for which we are fetching the credits. So once again, I pick one of the requests, I do tools breakpoint, and this time I'm going to use a wildcard. So I'm going to replace the ID of the movie by a star character, which means any amount of character will match. I'm going to call it this time all, or rather any movie credits breakpoint. I'm gonna save it. I'm going to disable the Napoleon movie breakpoint, so the one that was specific to the ID of the Napoleon movie. And now, if I go back to the app, so you can see if I select the Napoleon movie breakpoint, the breakpoint is still triggered because it matches the rule. We don't see the name of the breakpoint. Maybe there is a way to show it, but I don't see it right now. I'm going to just allow the request to continue. Okay, we got the data. And if I open another movie, like So 10, for instance, you can see that the breakpoint is also being triggered, because the new breakpoint is going to trigger for any movie ID that we pass, and not just the movie ID of a specific movie. So we are starting to get into something that is quite flexible, and that you can use if you want to monitor a specific request being made. It can also be useful if, like, in your app, you know that the request is being made, but you really don't understand when it's happening. You can enable this, try to do your flow by interacting with the app, and try and see when the breakpoint is going to trigger. Let me see if it's everything I want to tell you about breakpoints. So I told you that you can inspect the content, you can modify it. I think I've showed you everything for the breakpoints. Now we're going to see another feature, which is kind of like the breakpoint, but a continuation to the idea that you can use the breakpoint to change the content. I did it by hand, but doing it by hand, it's nice, but it can become a bit tedious. And if you want to enable the same modification every time, it's going to be tedious to do it by hand every time. Of course, there is a way to make this happen automatically. So I'm going to disable all the breakpoints just so that we have a clean slate. And this time I want to use a feature in the tool called map local. So what map local is going to do, you can see the tooltip, is going to use a file as a response for the selected request. So we're gonna be able to map a local file for the answer of a request. So when the request will be made, it will not go to the backend, but it's going to use a local file instead. So if I select it, you can see that what's nice when you create a map local, locally mapped request with an existing request is that it's how do you say it in English? Like it pre-filled the thing with the response that we got. So here I'm saying that I'm gonna call it replace any movie credits. And so when a request is made to the endpoint /movie/a movie ID /credits, it will always return the content of this local file, which you can see in the local text editor right here. So you can see you can also select a local file if you have a text file that you want to use. You can also map a local directory, which can be useful if you have like different, let's see what we do here. So you have to show a directory, and then you can be able to map like subdirectory with the structure of the URL. I'm just going to do the local file because it's the simplest one. And here, so you can see I have the cast from the Hunger Games movie. It's a bit late in France, and you can see that I'm starting to feel it. So I have the cast from the Hunger Games movie. So what's happening here is the HTTP response that is being received by iOS. Actually, if you've ever written an HTTP backend by hand, like I did a long time ago when I was a student, you can see like what's happening where you put first the first line with HTTP and the response code, then the headers, then an empty line, then the body. So this is the file that an HTTP response sends you. So I'm going to save it. So it's been saved normally. The window didn't close, so I guess I don't need to close the window. Yes, we can see it's been saved. Let me just resize the window so that you can see it. Perfect. And so now inside my app, we should see that if I go again in SO10, we have the cast of the Hunger Games movie. So you can just remember Tom Blythe as the first name to see that it appears in the other movies. So if I go on Napoleon, you can see we still have the same cast. It's better if I don't cover it. So you can see we have the same cast. We have also Peter Dinklage, which I can assure you was not in the movie. I saw it last weekend and he was not in the movie. If I go on the Trolls movie, we can see once again the same cast. That's because the response of the request is being mapped to a local file. I can also try and update it. So for instance, let me try and get, so this is the answer I got from the Napoleon movie. So I'm gonna copy the whole JSON, so like this. Then I'm gonna open the map local tool. So I'm opening the map local I created. I'm gonna remove the body and add another body. So this time it's the Napoleon movie credits I put in the body. And if I go back to my simulator, you can see that now every movie has a... It's funny because it gets the cast of Napoleon, but I picked the request where I had also manually changed the name of Napoleon to Oppenheimer. So now every movie has this double double time fake cast where it's not the right actors, but it's also not the actual cast of the actual Napoleon movie. But you get the idea of how it works. And this is extremely useful because what we've done here is that we've essentially, we've actually mocked the response of a network call, and at no point did we had to make any change to our source code. Since the beginning, Xcode is in the background. I have just launched the app. I didn't make any change to my Swift code, to my iOS code. And that's the really great feature of using tools like Proxyman, is that you can mock some parts of your app for free by acting on the network calls rather than the code inside your app. So I didn't need to create mocks inside my app and then to have the code path to inject it. So this approach can be really great in the case where you're working, for instance, like on code bases where there is no mock existing, there is no maybe dependency injection, so it would be very hard to introduce mocks. You can still get the benefits of using a mock by injecting the mock through the network, and I think this can be very useful. I see a few messages in the chat. So Pratama, you're saying Proxyman is great, nice UI, easy breakpoints, but quite pricey. Do you have any discount though? Yes, until the end of this weekend. So 1st December 2023, for those watching the replay, there is a code. It's available in the description. So in the description, you have a code for 15% off from the price of a license. And it's only available until the end of the weekend following the live stream. And Deya, you're saying, thanks for the Wireshark ID, and there is a macOS version for both Intel and ARM. So great to see there is an Intel, a Mac version for Wireshark. I would be curious to know if it works with HTTPS traffic, because it probably, you will see it as encrypted, and if you try to man in the middle, most probably like the app will cut it off. But it's good to know that the tool does exist on macOS. The only time I tried it was still when I was working on Windows computer. The dark times. So did I show you everything I wanted to show you? Because we're getting near the end of the script I had prepared. Yes, I wanted to show you something, is that there is another feature which we could say is kind of like the browser feature of map local. Maybe you saw it when I created map local, is that there is also map remote. And what map remote does is that it allows you to map a call to another request. So let me just say it like differently. Like you have a call made to URL A, and you can map it to a call to URL B, maybe on a completely different domain. So this feature can be particularly interesting. Once again, if you're working on an app where you cannot configure the app very well, and for some reason you need to mix and match, maybe you need to call for one specific endpoint the development version, and for all of the other the production version, or the other way around, like you're calling production endpoints for all of the endpoints, but you need to call a dev endpoint just to test a specific feature. You can actually do it using map remote. So let me move the window so that you can see it. The idea is that you say, okay, when this rule is triggered, so when a specific request is made to a URL that matches the rule, then you want to map it to something new. And so you have a lot of control. You can choose the protocol, the host, the port, the path, the query. You can also say preserve the original URL after matching. So it's going to keep the original URL, or preserve the host header. But the idea with this match remote feature is to be able to plug a request on actually another source of data, but that is not local. It's not a local file anymore this time. It's another backend that will be called over HTTP, but you will get the response from this new backend, and you will give it to the app that made the request, just like if it were an answer, a response to the original request. So this one can be quite useful also. I won't show it to you right now because in order to make it work, you need to have like something like setup. You need to have like several environments, and so I don't have anything like that. But if you work in this kind of context where you have more than one environment and you want to make sure that, and maybe for some reason, like at some point you need to mix and match two of your environments together, it can be a feature that can really help you. So I would say it's not the kind of feature that you use every day, which is a good thing, because if you need to use a feature like that every day, it's probably a sign that something is not good in either in your architecture or in your development process. But it's the kind of feature that you might need it someday for a specific use case, and that day you're really happy that it's there because it saves you a lot of time. Let's see what else I wanted to show you. Same, I won't show it to you, but there is a feature called scripting, which is basically map local but on steroid. Because map local, we saw that we can map a request with a local file. So it's a static approach because the file is static, it's not dynamic, it's not generated dynamically in response to the request. But you can also do this dynamic thing through a script. And so the way it works, you can see it's quite similar to map local in the sense that, once again, you are matching a rule that is defined through the URL of the request. And this time you can run code, which from the looks of it seems to be JavaScript. So it's really like on request and on response. So you have two functions where you can write code in order to use code in order to alter the response or the request. So for instance, you can add new headers, you can add new values to the query, you can maybe even alter the body, compose a new body, and same thing for the response. And you can dynamically, for instance, map to a different file. So it can be useful if you want to map to a local file, but depending on what was sent by the actual server, you want to map to a different one, it's actually possible to do it. So once again, a very powerful feature. I won't show you a demo because, just like before, I don't have something that is complex enough to be set up to show something where it works. Or maybe, you know what, just for the fun of it, I'm going to force a 500 return code whenever you query the Napoleon movie. So save and activate. Okay. So it's here. Let's try it. So I'm gonna go back to the app. So I'm gonna open like a movie like So 10. So this one is working perfectly fine. And then if I go into Napoleon, it didn't trigger. What happened? Why didn't it trigger? I probably made something wrong. So request response. Okay. I don't think I can make a breakpoint. So you can update the status code. So this function is called if the response checkbox is enabled. So it is enabled, okay. And here, I think it's the logs. So the logs, we can show it was indeed called. Why didn't it get? Maybe because, I think I know why maybe. Maybe because if I go into map local, I also have like, no, yes, I also have like the map local enabled. So maybe like they took like priority. So I've removed the map local. Let's see what's gonna happen now. So I go into Soten once again, working correctly. I go into Napoleon, also working correctly. So what did I miss? So this part I didn't prepare it. So I'm really like doing it live with you. Scripting. So it's here, script list. So there is this one. I'm gonna make it for any movie because maybe actually it's very possible that this was not the URL of just the Napoleon movie. That's very possible that I just like I'm thinking maybe I just got the ID wrong. So you know what? I'm just gonna get back to here. So no, that was the right one. Yes, 75, Joaquin Phoenix. So that was the right movie. No, I did get the right movie. So Just gonna copy and paste again to make sure. Yeah, so I did have the right movie. And for some reason, yeah, it's being called. So response status code set to 500. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna try to also, like, for instance, set the body like to be like the empty string. Let's see what's going to happen. Save and activate. We can see we have the console on the right. And snippet code. Okay, it's just to get some example from the docs. So let me run it again. Let's see what's gonna happen. So I click on Napoleon. Okay, this time we get something. So this time we get the given data was not valid JSON because I have oh, I think I know why. I think I know why it happened. I think it's because I guess it did change the answer to a 500. However, because there was a body, I guess the app still got the body, and because I was not checking for the response code, I think that might have been why. You know what? I think the argument I get here is the response. So let me check. Yes, it's the URL response. So I'm gonna try and do something like print response code. I never remember how you get the response code. It's terrible. Oh, it's because, oh yes, it's a URL response, but it's actually an HTTP. I think I need to do like a response as HTTP URL response, and then so like that, and then status code. Okay. First time I need to change the code inside this live stream. Is the live stream where I write the less Swift code ever. So let me run the app again. In Proxyman, I'm going to remove this line where I was removing the body, and we'll see what gets executed. First, I'm going to uncheck both checkboxes so that the script doesn't run. The app has been restarted, so I'm gonna run it, and you can see 200 for the response code. Okay, now let's go back to Proxyman, re-enable the script for request and response. I do have the line where I set the status code to 500. Okay, let me get back to the simulator. So that's indeed, I'm not sure if you can see it. Maybe it's better like that. So that's indeed my hypothesis that's being validated. So I did get a 500. However, because there was a body that it was able to correctly parse, it was not triggering an error. So I didn't have an error. Interesting. I'm gonna try and see what happens if I use a 400 instead. Let's see what's gonna happen. So going back to the simulator. Yeah, so actually, it seems that if there is if you just change the response, the status code, but there is a body, like in URL session, you don't get an error because I do check that error is nil before I move further. So that's not enough to make the code fail, but at least Proxyman was behaving as it was expected to, which is a good thing. I see a message in the chat. So Deya, you're saying, let me make it more visible. So you're saying mapping URLs is useful if you have a mobile app that talks to local and you want it to talk to staging. Yes, these cases can happen when you need to mix and match different environments. As I was saying, like if it happens every day, you have a much bigger problem than just being able to debug that one issue. But if it happens once in a while, it can be really, really useful. Another thing you're saying, Proxyman is cool. One change I would like is when exporting multiple requests into Postman collection to name the request by the GraphQL operation name as GraphQL have the same endpoint. Ah, that's a very interesting point that you make. So if you've never used GraphQL, the idea is that you have only one endpoint and then you pass as an argument the schema you want to get as a result. So very smart concept. But of course, if when you export it uses the name of the the endpoint as like the key or the file name, then it's not like descriptive enough. So a very good remark. What I would recommend honestly is I'm sure that there is like either like a support or an email address or anything to reach the developer of Proxyman. I would really recommend that you share this feedback with them, because like I talk to them, they are like super reactive, and you can see it when you use the product that they make something that they care about. So I've made a screenshot to forward it to them, but don't hesitate to also do it. I'm sure they will be very interested to hear about this particular issue, and maybe like they already have a workaround that they can share with you. But very interesting indeed, using Proxyman with a GraphQL. Basically, I'm going to show it again, but if you were to use a GraphQL API, all of the URL would be the same here. They would all be the same. It would be the same endpoint, and the difference would be in the body that you make in the request to say, okay, I want this property, this property, this property. So that indeed would be much less readable. And we can see some requests made are red is the ones for which we have added, we have first the 500 return call or the 400 like in this last example. And I think that concludes what I wanted. Oh no, one thing. That's why I write scripts, because I forgot to show you one last feature of Proxyman that is very useful, especially if you work with the simulator, is that when you work on an actual iOS device, or on your iPhone, on your iPad, in the developer menu, you can simulate a bad network. That can be extremely useful if you want to make sure that a view loads in a reasonable time, even when the network is bad. But on the simulator, you don't have this feature out of the box, because simply like it's not part of what the simulator offers. And even if you want to simulate no connection, a good way to do it is to just like turn off the Wi-Fi of your Mac, but then you're turning off the Wi-Fi for your Mac entirely, and that might not be what you want to do. But you have a tool in Proxyman here called Network Conditions that allows you to simulate a bad network. So you can enable it. And then, so you can even enable it only for specific hosts. This way, you're not applying it to all of your outgoing network, which is a good thing, because with what I'm doing right now, if I were to simulate a bad network for all outgoing traffic, the live stream that I'm also broadcasting from the same computer would probably like take a big hit. So that wouldn't be that great. So let's see. I'm going to only enable it for this domain, so api.themoviedb.org. So let me get back to the window, tools, network conditions. So only for this host, so bad network for the MovieDB. I'm going to choose like a slow network, for instance. I'm going to add it. I really hope I didn't make a mistake and screw up my my live stream, but I don't see any alert popping up, so I think it's okay. And now if I go back to my app, you should see that if I open a new movie, you can see it took some time to appear. It was not as immediate as it used to be. You can see it took some time. I'm going to even try and make it even worse. So I'm gonna try and look. Okay, you're telling me the stream looks normal. Perfect. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, if I do like very bad network, for instance, very bad network, and I go back into the app. You can see it takes even more time. And keep in mind, we are only querying small JSON, so that's not a big piece of data. But it did finally manage to arrive. And you can see it shows you very bad network. It means a bandwidth of less than 1 megabit, bit or byte, I'm not sure, 1 MB per second. 10% of the packets are being lost, and you have a huge delay, so you have a very big ping. Now, this can be very useful. Of course, I don't want to check this box apply system-wide while I'm doing the live stream. And for the story, like the first time I gave a SwiftUI training course, it was with a group of people over Zoom because we were still in the days of lockdown, and I wanted to show them like how the app behaves with no network, and I didn't think about it. I just cut my Wi-Fi, and of course, like the Zoom cut for everyone. And it took me like 1 or 2 minutes of speaking to no one before I basically like realized what I had done. So. Fun story that you can avoid by using Proxyman. And now I'm going to disable the bad network. And if I go back to my app, you will see that on a new movie, now it's loading as fast as it used to. So I see a few messages in the chat. So let me go over them. So you were saying the Proxyman can simulate internet speed. Yes, it can. And yes, indeed, it's really cool. Can you add delay for the request? Let's see. I don't think you can do it with the tool we just saw. And I mean, the network conditions. I mean, there is delay here, but it's the ping. However, you can still do it with Proxyman in general, because remember, we saw the scripting. I'm sure that on the scripting, you can either on request or on response add a delay by doing maybe like a sleep, for instance. Because since we are writing JavaScript, that might be another approach to add a delay this way. So you might want to go to look in that direction, but since it looks like JavaScript, I would say that adding a sleep should work. Maybe it's not sleep, the name of the function you need to call. Maybe there is like a more specific API you need to call, but I think this should do the trick. Okay, and yes, you are right. It was bit because, yeah, it's small b, so bit, and not byte, which is big B. And one message that says, I'm not able to see my Xcode project in Proxyman. Do I need to set up anything specific in your iMac? So yes, you need to set up a few specific things, which I covered towards the beginning of the live stream. So don't worry, the live stream is recorded and is gonna be available, like the replay is available as soon as it's over, so you will be able to watch it. But you need, when you start Proxyman the first time, you need to give it some permissions, and then you should see your app running from Xcode appearing here. At least if you run it in the simulator. On an actual device, I'm not sure. I don't remember. But on a simulator, you should see it appear. Like, for instance, here I see my app architecture being in my list of apps. And interestingly, I can also unfold this and see the domains that are being queried by the app. All right. I think this time I've covered everything I wanted to show you. And the last thing I wanted to cover, I mean, I mentioned it because there was a great question about that topic, about how do you use Proxyman with an actual iOS device. Sorry. So I'm just going to go over it once again, just to make sure that I do give you all the info I wanted to give you. So when you want to use Proxyman with an actual iOS device, you have two different use cases. First use case is you want to run your app from Xcode and basically do what we did with the simulator. And yes, you can do it. And in the setup, in the certificate menu, you just need to install the certificate on the physical device. It's basically the same procedure than for the simulator. You might only need to tap to input your code on your iPhone. That might be the only difference that might happen, and even that I'm not sure. So that one is fairly straightforward. And the other use case is that you want to use Proxyman as a standalone app on iOS to monitor network traffic from the apps you have installed on your iPhone, and you can do that also. Actually, I had bookmarked the correct page. So what I want to show you, so it's the doc from Proxyman. So that's the procedure to install certificate on an iOS device. So it's the same thing than for the simulator. You can see you just need to do a few more actions because you need to actually install a certificate on your iPhone or your iPad. And the other one I wanted to show you is the Proxyman for iOS app, which you can get on the App Store. And basically, it acts the same way than the macOS app, except that it runs on iOS. And so you can use it to monitor the traffic of apps that are installed on your iOS device. So I would recommend that you check out both if monitoring traffic on actual iOS device is one of your needs. And let me just go back to the iOS app. So the standalone iOS app, I just want to mention that it can be very interesting. This app, if you are working with people who are testing builds of your app, but who are not developers. So they are not building from Xcode. They are downloading a build, maybe from TestFlight, maybe from Firebase, and maybe they also want to debug to understand what's happening or to write a bug report. So I'm thinking about testers, I'm thinking about product owners, product managers, this kind of people that are still technical enough that they are testing a build that doesn't come from the App Store, but they are not building from Xcode, and so they don't have access to the same tool than you have when building from Xcode. This app can be very useful because if they see a bug, it allows them to also share information about the request that led to this bug. And this can be very useful, both for them, but also for you. Because if you have a tester that tells you, oh, this is not working as expected, but you don't have enough information to reproduce, it can be very frustrating. On the other hand, if they can tell you, oh, it's not working as expected, and I know that this is the request was sent, and this is the response I got, then you have everything you need to reproduce, and you are much better equipped to debug. So this time, I have told you everything I wanted to tell you. So once again, I have a big thank you to Proxyman for sponsoring this live stream. As you've been able to see from the text above me, this was a live stream made in collaboration with Proxyman. If you are watching live or in the days following the live, you have a code in the description to get 15% of the price of a paid license that gives you access to the full features of Proxyman. If you want to just learn more or just try Proxyman, you have also a link in the description to Proxyman's website where you can download it and then you can install it on your Mac. And I think I just need to say thanks a lot for following this live stream. A big thank you to the people who asked questions, who made remarks in the chat during the live stream. It really is amazing for me because it makes it feel so much more lively than just me speaking like in the void in my empty apartment. But also you made great points that I'm sure people watching the replay will also you've made great points that will naturally come to the mind to people watching the replay. And so by voicing it into the chat, you've given them a voice. And I can tell you that it's really an amazing experience that really adds a lot to the value of watching the replay of a live stream. That's all I had for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. If there are other tools that you know and like and you would like me to cover, please let me know in the comments of the video. And I guess I just have to say, yeah, thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time. Bye bye.